Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monte. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast. Today we welcome David Brandt of Brandt Farms and Walnut Creek Seed. If you know your soil health and no-till history and follow the leaders in those areas, then you know how fortunate we are to get to visit with David. He's been no-tilling since 1971, back when they called it trash farming and a whole lot of other things. But David would not be deterred. He continued to test systems, implement cover crops, and utilize livestock to improve soil health. Listen in to this great conversation as he and Monte talk about the history, the present, and the exciting future on their farm.
Welcome to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm greatly blessed to be joined by a real leader, pioneer in the regenerative ag movement, probably 40 years before the word regenerative ag was even known. This is the trailblazer in person on the podcast today. Welcome, Dave Brandt.
Thank you very much. You know, it's interesting to see how the movement has changed from the time I began in 1971. You know.
Yeah. So you're just only 50 years of experience. You don't have much to offer our guests today.
Not really, no.
Okay. Well, we'll try to get somebody with 60 or 70 years in the future. So listeners, you're just going to have to tolerate Dave's only 5 decades of experience. So no, let's talk a little bit about that. What is wrong with you, Dave? Why did you decide to go no-till when it was definitely not cool?
Well, to make a real long story short, we actually planted our first no-till field in 1969. We was on a 700-acre farm. My wife and I was running it. We had about 90 Charolais cows that we calved and finished out, and somewhere close to 100 sows we was starting to finish. And we just did not have time to do all the tillage work that we needed on that 700 acres. So we tried a 30-acre field that I was able to rent that came out of set-aside programs back from the 50s, you know. And I never will forget, we started planting corn in there, and it was briars and multiflora rows and stuff. And my grandfather was about 82 years old at that time, and he came over and he looked at me, he grabbed his hat and pulled it down over his ears, and he says, "My God, boy, what are you doing?" And I says, "Well, we're trying to plant corn, Grandpa." And well, he says, "Good luck, but I know you're not going to make anything," you know. So that was the way it started.
So real encouraging is what you're saying.
Yeah, he was real encouraged with it. But interesting, that field of corn made 100 bushel in the fall, which was a lot of corn back in 69, you know. And I never will forget it when we was had a John Deere 45 combine with no cab, and he was helping me, and he says, "I've never seen so much corn from a field you've never done anything to, David." And I said, "Well, we're learning, you know." And he became one of my best spokesmen when I'd go out to speak somewhere. I'd always take Grandpa with me, and he would tell about that story, how he doubted it worked, you know, but proved him wrong.
I mean, sometimes I bet you'd probably go to farmer groups and you could give a 1-hour presentation, and then Grandpa could say something, maybe one sentence or something afterwards for 30 seconds, and then that made all the difference.
That's right. He sure did. He surely was one to put the message forward. And I think a lot of places I went just enjoyed to see how excited he was about it, as old as he was, you know. And
that's awesome.
It's been a real venture. I remember when we first started and was running with Chevron Chemical Company, introduced Gromoxone or Paraquat at that time, you know, and then all we had was atrazine and 2,4-D as a chemical when we first started. And we were called trash farmers. And then there was a big sign that went up in the in our hometown that says, no-till farming means no corn, you know. So it's been a real venture, and it was fun to work with Chevron Chemical. I worked with DuPont when they come out with Blade X and those kind of things early in the late 70s, and then Monsanto come on the scene in the early 90s, and you know, I've worked with all those companies, and worked with Deere. I bought the first John Deere 7000 no-till planter Deere made. It's thrown over was a one, and so that's we had a lot of fun. You know, just learning, and had a lot of fun, and we had a lot of field days. We try to have a field day every year, and get people to bring equipment. And of course, the policy on David's farm, when you show up, you come a day before, you set up your drill. You had to leave by 4 o'clock and leave the keys in the tractor, you know. I had old tractors. I had a 720 John Deere and a Davy Brown, and boy, to pick some of these new tractors out with cabs and be able to run them, you know, that was pretty much fun. And I'd run them drills and planters as hard as I could for an evening, see how well they performed. If they didn't plug up, they was back where they found out. But if they did plug up, they sat in the middle field with corn fodder clear over the top of the seed box sometimes, you know. What a time those companies had when they showed up in the morning and there was 450 people looking at that drill with fodder piled up on it, you know.
Oh man, I'm sure they appreciated that.
Oh yes.
Well, what I heard earlier is you said your first field was on a rental farm. So first off, okay, so you're doing it on the rental farm, not your own. Okay.
Yes.
And that was no-till.
Yes.
But you also mentioned you've been cover cropping since 1971, correct?
Correct.
So it
Yes.
only took you 2 years to get the cover cropping and no-till. And I know people have been no-tilling for 25 years that are just getting started on cover crops. How did you make that connection so early on, and definitely before it was cool in the magazines?
Well, I think the connections we made was that, you know, we played with it the first year in '69. Then we didn't do anything with that soil. It was starting to wash away, and it was on like a 20% slope. And well, we just had to do something, you know. So then we put in cereal rye and hairy vetch, you know, and that was another real experience. And that's how we began. And of course, the cow calf herd we had, it was great to be able to take the wheat off and put something in there. Usually we had clover in it because that was easy to do. You just broadcast it in the spring. When it was freezing and thawing, you had a clover crop you could make hay off of. But then we learned that we could do other things after the wheat come off to have a better cover crop that would build nitrogen in the soil. And we played with that for 9 or 10 years till we thought we had it where we'd like to keep talking about it, you know. And we did a lot of research with different legume crops to find out how much nitrogen each one would produce. And then in the late 90s, we learned how to blend them together. So now we're in the process of using about 4 to 5 legumes with about 3 to 4 grasses and 2 brassicas. And that seems to be the mix that works extremely well after wheat to rejuvenate these wore out fields that we're able to rent because no one makes any money off of them.
Very, very good. Now, just out of curiosity, when you're haying that clover crop, or that's primarily your legume that you'd be haying after wheat, or
Yes.
when you did at least, would you hay it again the next spring prior to planting your subsequent cash crop? Because
Yeah, we always kept it 1 year into the hay crop. Yes, correct.
So you get
Like
one cutting the following year. You get a cutting in the fall and a cutting in the spring.
Spring, correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good.
And then we, you know, as we grew, we ended up with 200 Charolais cows and 200 sows. So that just made the no-till a whole lot easier. The neat thing about calving, we used to calve in February and March because we thought we needed to get those calves on the ground and, you know, maybe try to have a 500 to 600 pound calf in the fall, you know. And then all of a sudden, we'd plant the corn too early and we'd have to go out and figure out what insect ate it or what happened to it and then replant it. So I got smart enough to change my calving program so that we started calving on the first day of May, run through the 28th of May before the calves were all done or cows were all done. So I didn't worry about planting corn in May. So it was always warm. And, the last of May, 1st of June, corn come up in 3 days, and that seemed to solve all our insect pressure problems that we were having. So it just made life a lot easier. So we've had a lot of failures, not too many successes, but we've learned an awful lot,
You realize, Dave, you're very counter to what most farmers think. If I heard you right, you doubled your cow and your sow numbers, and because you no-tilled. Most people would just till more and get rid of the livestock. That's the cool thing to do, is to keep the tillage and get rid of the livestock. But you went to no-till to be able to do more livestock.
Correct. Right. Yes. And the livestock was a big key because we had 2 packing houses in Columbus at that point in time, and we were growing what they said was what they wanted for their market. And I really have to say I thought we had good cattle and hogs, because I was growing them, but we were doing really well. It was on a partnership where another person owned the land and we were the labor force for, and we all learned a lot. And that's what made it exciting for us. There was lots of hard times and lots of trouble, but you learn to work through them. Mm-hmm. And never carried crop insurance. Not that I'm opposed to crop insurance, but never carried it because I thought every time I checked with it, it had restrictions on what I could do. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I was mad enough or mean enough or something, whatever it took, to say, well, if this corn crop dies or the hail takes it out in June, we'll plant something else, And there's been years we've planted all our corn ground to canola. There's been years it all went to sorghum, grain sorghum. I mean, when you got livestock and they're eating about 85% of what you grow, you got to make sure you got feed for them.
Right. And plus it gives you flexibility. Really, finally this year, the crop insurance rules are very flexible, and that can still vary by state, especially in the western states where they're under 20 inches of rainfall. That's a problem. But that finally this year. So
yes.
But in the past they've been very limiting on what you can do. So that is exciting.
That was a good thing. Like I said, I had been to Washington. I've also testified in front of the crop insurance people. I was testified in front of Congress how I thought they should change the rules. And, that was probably 7 or 8 years ago, but it was a way to plant the seed to get those people in charge to understand how regenerative agriculture, which I'll call it now, can help, and I think that's an idea,
Yeah, just for fun. Let's go through all the names that this has been called. Today, like you said, it's regenerative ag. Right prior to that, it was soil health. I think right prior to that, it was soil quality. Then it was what? Soil
sustainable agriculture.
Sustainable agriculture.
Yeah.
What else has it been called, Dave? Let's keep adding to the top 10 list.
Yeah, as you went further back, it was called trash farming or ugly farming, or I farm ugly. Those are some of the characteristics and names that was attached to what we was trying to do. Mm-hmm. And I really like this regenerative part, because it's like when we talk about how we can improve things, and we have as producers, we have beat up this soil immensely with tillage and plows and everything, and most of the livestock went to confinement. So we don't have the opportunity to have it. There's no more fences, because we were taught in the 80s from the universities to take out all the fences and put the cattle in the barn. You're better off. I did it too. Today, I wish I had all the fences back that I've tore out, because I'm sure they would still deter some animals,
I just wish I had all the water lines and the wells that we got rid of,
Yeah, right.
Who needs a hydrant out in the middle of that 160 acre field? Get rid of it. Oh, I would pay big money to have a hydrant in the middle of a 160 acre field today.
Yes. But I really like the word regenerative, because it means that we're going to build the soils back. Sometimes, you have to refer back to the Bible and the Proverbs. He talked about how you plant the seed on the soils, and some of it fell on the rocky places, and some of it fell on the paths, and some of it fell on good soil. So, I think the regenerative is what we're doing. We're bringing back the soils to make us more profitable, more resilient, and better quality nutrients in those grains that we're producing regeneratively.
Yep. Yeah, it has a much greater meaning than just sustaining, and that's what I really appreciate about it. So we can say we're building back soils better, or we can say we're making soils great again, depending on which brand you like to follow, right?
That's correct. Right. Right. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I apologize for having a little fun here for a little bit, but I do have to know how many different, you are the cover crop king, how many different cover crops do you think you have planted in total since you began this journey? And what are some of the more unique ones you've had?
Well, we've tried about every color of pea that you can find. We've tried every type of vetch we can find. We're still sticking mainly with hairy vetches. We like it really well. Some of the vetches tend to hang on longer. Some of the vetches are harder to kill. Most of the vetches won't produce as much nitrogen as hairy will. Some unique ones we've really liked and began working with is crimson clover. When we started with it 9 years ago, I called Ohio State University and talked to the lab person about how we should plant it and what we should do with it. And he said, David, he says, I'm just telling you, it won't grow north of the Ohio River. He says, so there's no use to bring it in. It's a Kentucky plant. And I thought, well, okay. But we tried it. It really went well. Now, it probably won't make the kind of seed. It will make some seed, but it won't make the seed like it does in Kentucky because we don't let it grow that long. Another one was a sun hemp, which is an African plant, and 9 years ago, I went to a meeting and this nice young man stood up and he was talking and he showed this picture of this plant and he showed it and it was a pretty nice seed. And about 4 or 5 weeks later, it was 6 foot tall, and in 3 months, it was 25 foot tall. And when he dug the roots, it had nodules the size of tennis balls on it, And I says, when he got done his meeting, I says, by golly, I got to have some of that, I said, so I talked to him and I never forget. He says, yeah, Mr. Brandt, he says, I'll send it to you. He says, I'll even send you the seed free, but you got to pay the freight, And I says, fine. And I forgot about it, and it was like August the 20th when my wife come out to the field and we were planting some cover crops. And she says, UPS is up at the house ahead. And she says, there's a burlap bag that they threw down on the ground, but they want $420 for the freight. She says, what'd you order? And I said, well, I don't know, but just pay the guy. And then I'll come up and look at it tonight when I get done, And got up there and here it was, this bag from Africa, with the sun hemp seeds in it. So we planted it, I think we planted it on the 25th of August. And I thought, man, I just can't hardly wait. So we watched it grow, and it was a summer that was about 90 degrees and about normal rainfall. So it only got about 4 foot tall. I was so disappointed. I thought we found nodulation like peas, so it didn't do any better nodulating than the winter peas did, But man, did it ever have a root system on it. So we're still using it. We use it in our blends. I like to think about using warm season legumes and cool season legumes, as well as warm season grasses and cool season grasses, because if we mix them all together, we can actually and I shouldn't say this out loud, but I will, we're trying to fool Mother Nature, because I don't know when we make these plans what August and September is going to be. I don't know whether it's going to be a hot summer or a cool, wet summer. So that way we know something's going to grow, and we found out with more species, they tend to challenge each other. So they hang in there longer in the soils and do lots of nice things for us,
And plus that gives you, if you have, that early August planting window, you have enough time for the summers to do something.
Yes.
And then the winters are there after the frost, and they continue on without having to do a second planting. So, I mean,
Right.
it's a good, not only the diversity, but it allows the continuous living root to persist, through the winter and into next spring. So,
And, it really works well behind wheat, because it allows us to clean up the wheat fields after we harvest the wheat. Because, if we plant cover crops July the 4th, when we harvest the wheat, 99 out of 10, they'll go to seed, and we don't want our cover crops to go to seed, because it takes the nodulation from the roots and moves it to make seed. So we're always waiting until about the last of July, the 1st of August to plant. So this way we get our combines a silver seeder, a gleaner, so we call it our silver seeder. So we'll have these little paths behind it where the wheat grows, or the rye or the barley grows. And then we have some other hard to control obnoxious weeds, like Johnson grass or ball panic or something. So we can spray them out, make the place clean, and then plant the cover crop. And that extra 60 days of growth or 30 days of growth you get just means the difference of 2 to 3 foot on a cover crop and 2 or 3 foot on the root growth. So fellows that's trying to do cover crops behind corn and beans, they get some satisfaction, but not near as much as you do if you happen to have wheat in your rotation,
Yep, that's true. So typical, well, I know there's no such thing as a Dave Brandt typical rotation. So
Yes,
this is a bad question to ask, but so after the wheat, you'd have your summer cover crops with your cool season, warm season blend come over. And I would suppose after that, are you getting enough nitrogen then to go to corn?
Yes, we get the corn.
Corn bean wheat rotation is what you're doing?
Corn. Then after the corn comes off, we go to rye.
Okay.
Plant the rye in the fall, plant soybeans in the spring. And then the only crop we don't have a cover crop for is our small cereal grain crop after the soybeans, because we're harvesting the beans and we don't have enough time to get something in.
And they are the quote unquote cover crop compared to what your neighbor would have.
Yes, correct.
Not your neighbor, but your conventional farmer. We won't pick
farmers, right?
If he's listening.
Right. And we, with this rotation, it makes it really simple for David, because we have 333 acres of corn, we have 333 acres of beans, and we have 333 acres of wheat. So there's no doubt in my mind, after we take the corn crop off, what goes in, it goes to rye and then goes to beans, and all the beans go to small grain. So, I don't have to worry about what's going to happen.
There you go.
And it makes it real simple for us.
So
and when we can do that, we can lower our nitrogen rates by about 75%.
That was my very next question. So you beat me to it. So you're lowering your typical applied nitrogen, because you're getting probably with that sun hemp and those kind of things anywhere from 80 to 120, maybe 150 units of nitrogen from those cover crops that come after the wheat.
Yes, after the wheat, right.
Plus you're getting the decomposition of that wheat residue in that season versus the following spring, competing for nutrient uptake with your corn.
Correct.
Haven't you seen that before? At least when I work with farmers in Montana, especially, they get a big layer of thatch built up on after continuous small grain production.
Right.
And that cover crop gives the biology a chance to break it down, right?
Yes, sir. That's right. Because you got your nitrogen from your leaves that's falling down on the carbon from their small grain crop, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring our carbon to nitrogen ratio back to a balance, because the wheat in rotation makes it a high carbon source. So if we get some legumes in behind that, we can bring that back down to 20 to 1 or 30 to 1, whatever you desire to have, And plus what we've seen with doing it earlier, our roots go deeper. So we'll have roots from 24 to 60 to 70 inches deep, which allows us to bring up copper, magnesium, phosphorus, some potassium, some calcium. So our home farm that we started no-tilling in 71, the pH was 6.8, 6.9. Today it is 6.9, and we've not hauled any lime since 71.
Wow.
You know, so we're seeing our cover crops bring up a lot of calcium to help us out, you know.
Right. And plus, without the addition of commercial fertilizers too, that's helping with
That's great.
acidifying. And like you said, you're balancing from the subsoil. So that, and
Yes.
that in Ohio is a big deal. I don't
It
know
is a
how
big
many
deal.
people realize that, but very wet, very acidic, really parent soils. And you have problems with aluminum toxicity, 4.5 pH or lower in your subsoil. So that's a big deal.
That's a big deal. You're right. Right. And on the same token, with that biomass up there in the range of 15 to 20,000 pounds per acre, you know, it's about 3 inches thick. So we actually suppress a lot of the broadleaves. We actually suppress some grasses, not a lot of them, but some. So our herbicide program is in reduction by 50% or better. You know.
So other than 75% reduction in nitrogen, 51% or 50% reduction in your herbicide program, and likely, how many fungicides do you spray, Dave? I mean, you've got to have that corn leaf blight and tar spot and rust and gray leaf spot and all those things, right?
Well, we have not sprayed a fungicide or insecticide for 10 years.
Why would you want to kill your friends?
Yes, right.
So
Now we have done some trials. Just because my agronomist says you're using this corn, it needs to have a fungicide. So, you know, we will put on probably 5 or 6 acres of fungicide in a field to see if there is a difference, you know. And that's how we learn. And for the last 4 years, he's never seen a difference in the yield other than it may take 10 bushel away if we put a fungicide on.
Interesting.
We have never seen a plus.
We have the same agronomist, or that you got to spray it because it's a susceptible hybrid and it looks bad, no doubt. I mean, no fault of his. It looked affected. We did have a 4 bushel positive advantage.
Yes.
But by no means does that economically pay, let alone the long-term impacts of potential soil, hurt. So
Well, I have to laugh at some agronomists are really good and some are, this way, but my agronomist thinks it needs to be put on. You put it on with an airplane, you do the whole field, and he says, "Did you see a yield bump?" Well,
how would you ever know?
It's awful hard to find out if you got a yield bump if you sprayed the whole field,
And just on a side note, same way with herbicides, right? How do you know that you don't have a yield hit from a herbicide because you always spray the whole field? And it's always fascinating if you ever happen to have a little corner or a place that you miss with a herbicide and you look at the corn in there, obviously there's weeds, okay? But you look at it and it's like, wow, that really looks good. And you wonder how much they are affecting us. So,
Well, I think what we've done, how we've learned is by reducing. Sometimes it got us. I mean, let's face it, sometimes we made a mistake, and I'm not afraid to admit it. But if you leave 6 rows or 8 rows without fertilizer or without nitrogen, and maybe you put 6 or 8 more rows on with half, and then you do the balance of the field with what you normally do because you feel better about it, But then when you come out there at the combine and where you didn't put maybe only 20 pounds of nitrogen on and then still yield is the same as where you put on 200, well, you remember that for the next year,
Yeah, it makes you feel really bad, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, to me, it makes a learning curve out of it, because if you can do that for a couple of years running, then you know exactly what your cover crops can do for you. And I guess I can't tell producers enough that they need to do some trials and errors or trials to find out how this is going to work on their soils, because if they're sandy soils, it may take more nitrogen because it tends to leach away. If they're on heavy clay soils, it's wet, you don't need much, But I don't know whether producers are willing to experiment or whether they just want the university to tell them this is what we do, this is how you do it, and then they got somebody to blame. you know.
Well, for those producers that aren't waiting on the university, and they want to bring a little more diversity into their farm, their crop rotation and cover crops, what are some tips you give people starting out to consider, or some of the thought process? I'm not asking for the specific formula because you don't know where they're located and such, but what are some of the things you first start to have a farmer think about differently?
Well, I used to like to start with them, you know, and say, you know, they're corn and bean producers, they're used to doing tillage. So maybe you take a field and try rye cover. Now, I don't care how you get it out there. You can blow it on with a high boy, you can blow it on with an airplane, or you can wait till harvest is over and plant it.
Yep.
And keep the rates fairly low, you know, 30, 40 pounds the acre. Now, you're still going to have to use a herbicide because it's not going to be thick enough to suppress the weeds, but they get used to looking at something green. I mean,
Good point.
the first year, the first guy tries it and it gets wet in the spring, and all of a sudden the rye's 6.5 and 7 foot tall. My phone's ringing off the hook. What am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? You know, wow, what do I do? And I just tell them to plant it, you know. And I said, you know, if you want to kill it early, you can do that, but you're not going to get the benefit of it if you wait and plant green into it. But, you know, we have to let these producers understand how to work with what they've got and try to educate them as we go and be there to answer their questions when they have them. Because I think that's been the problem with a lot of the cost share programs to get cover crop in. We give them money for cost share, but there's no one there to answer the question or hold their hand when something goes wrong. Because today's equipment, no matter what color it is, it don't matter, is all heavy enough to do no-till work into cover crop.
Mhm.
You know, there's no reason they can't do it. And we have an infiltration problem, not a runoff problem. Because if we could infiltrate the water, we would not have a runoff problem.
That is so
Goes
true.
around.
And we have some pretty amazing videos of that. But yeah, we can, you know, our soils become so poor performing, you know, absorbing maybe half an inch an hour.
Right.
And today's rain events are 2, 3, 6 inches an hour.
Yeah.
And they're 3 to 4 weeks apart, you know, so.
And we are working with Ohio State on water quality for the last 2 years. It's been interesting. They have a flume that they have installed in a area where it's supposed to collect the water and run off on the surface. We also have a flume on a 12-inch tile, which has worked really well for them because we have flow on 120 acres that's tiled. So they've had constant flow so they can monitor that. The interesting thing, the flume for the surface water is there's about a 27-acre watershed that would fill this flume with water. And it's been there for 2 years and they've only had one rainfall event get into the flume. The rest of us all
their
soaked
sensors
in.
broke is the problem, Dave. It's not your infiltration rate.
Yes, this first one they had in was 2 by 3, so it was 3 foot wide and 2 foot long and narrowed down. And the professor come last summer and he says, David, he says, we just ain't getting any water in this. And I said, well, I says, you know, we can infiltrate 6 inches an hour here. And he says, well, we're going to pull it out. And I said, no, I said, I don't want you to. And he says, well, we'll be back. So he brings an 8 by 12 flume in and then puts 40 foot of 2x6s to direct the water into it. So it's bigger, you know, it's like having a bigger truck. You haul more, make more money, you know. But anyhow, after they put it in, they had one rainfall event, and we've had 5 or 7 events where we had over 2.5 inches in less than a half an hour. So you can, you know, it's fun to hear his explaining of what's going on, you know.
Well, I find that interesting. Plus the tile, how much did you get out of that tile that serviced 120 acres?
Well, normal flow is about 1.5 inches or 2 coming out of this 12-inch tile at the bottom.
Mhm.
When we have a rainfall event, they claim it raises about 2 inches, but it stays there for 5 to 7 days longer than a neighbor's tile that's on conventional that has a large flush with a lot of mud in it, a lot of silt in it.
Hmm.
So it's really interesting to see the two different comparisons that they have,
So you're taking in water faster and you're
Yes.
holding it longer, giving
Longer,
it
and
chance
it
for the plant
releases
to
it
use
slower.
and releases it slower. So that's why, we didn't have these flooding issues in, years past, is because
Years past.
the
Correct.
landscape function like this in total in a prairie system. So
Yes.
very, very interesting. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit from the production side to talk a little bit more about the output side. So, we've heard Dave approaches things a little bit differently, and he's pretty simple, straightforward, and has a goal on it. But now he's creating higher value crops and more diverse crops and such. You do a lot. You've really had a lot of focus on your output. So you're not too interested in just loading up the grain truck, taking it to the elevator, are you?
Not really. Not really. We're doing an awful lot of work with nutrient dense amino acid grains. We're trying to find producers that have livestock that's interested in a higher quality grain. Most of our grains are between 9 and 12% protein for corn. Soybeans are running 42 to 44% protein. Can't tell you what wheat is because we haven't done much work with our wheat because it's tough to find a protein market for wheat for us, So it mainly is a crop we just sell to ADM or something like that and let it go. In the last 3 months, we've changed gears and we are now milling a lot of our own wheat and corn to go from farm to table. So we've started a little retail business selling flours and corn meals, which is not going to take all the 900 acres, 300 acres of corn, but it sure helps on one end,
Oh, absolutely. And so you're looking for places where people will in bulk pay you for the value add that you're doing in nutrient density, in particular the protein. But talk
Right.
a little bit about the milling that you're doing and what is it like working with those buyers and what they're looking for?
It's been quite interesting for me because I never thought you just ground it up and you ate it, Well, there's about 25 different sizes of cornmeal that somebody wants. It seems like they want it from coarse to fine. And but with the way we can do it, we can meet whatever the processor would like to have, and we have some bakers that want our cornmeal really fine so they can line their oven with the cornmeal and then put their dough on top of it and make bread with it. We're using open pollinated corn. So we're growing about 100 acres of open pollinated corn, and it happens to be yellow, red, and blue, and some orange corn, which is really dark orange, and it's a flint corn and really makes a nice meal. And then we're growing some artisan wheats like Turkey Red, Red Fife, and Eichhorn wheats that are worth a whole lot of money if you can get them into flour.
So how do you stumble across where to get the seed, and are you growing and retaining that seed for yourself on the open pollinated? Okay, so okay, we have Dave Brandt's mind going a million miles an hour, and then how does everybody else on your team or your helpers keep up to find all this stuff to make the vision happen?
Well, I've got 2 grandsons on the farm, and my son comes home. He's here about 2 hours every evening, and each one of them has their opinion on how to get this done. So I just let them do their thing, and Grandpa kind of oversees it, and we are able to find stuff. The grandsons are real good on internet, and they can find the seeds that we need, and we just get enough to plant maybe 8 or 10 acres, and then from there we can, since it's open pollinated, we can keep the seed and clean it and have our own seed available, which is really nice.
That is great. And don't you think over time, as you retain your own seed in a scenario like that, you're selecting for seed that's going to be best adapted to your area over time?
I believe that's true. Yes.
Yeah, we're taking that approach on our own farm with soybeans now, and want to try to get into the open pollinated, and for our direct marketing business, I think there's some opportunity there. It won't be huge, but it's diversity, right?
Well, it's really, I guess we're in a unique situation. We're only about 15 minutes from downtown Columbus. The population is growing really fast around us. I don't think if we was in the middle of Utah and it was 10 hours to the grocery store, whether we would mill much corn or not, I mean, but we just happen to be in an area where this is going to work out real well, where we can do a lot of farm to table stuff. So
one of the opportunities, when we're trying to enable regenerative agriculture and make it possible, for everyone, large scale farmers and small scale farmers, everyone in between. What are some of the things that you see out there right now that's missing, Dave, as far as knowledge base, technology and tools? Where do you see are some opportunities for those who are wanting to make a difference, make an impact in regenerative agriculture, that are supporting farmers? What are your needs?
Well, I think what I see is the real need is, as we do regenerative farming, is the education, how to get started, how to mentor someone. I cannot believe how well people that is in the regenerative movement want to share. I mean, if you work with conventional farmers, they're more tight-lipped, let's say, or they won't talk to you about their operation because they're afraid what they do is a secret, and maybe their neighbor, if they picked up one thing, would take land from them or something, But I think when we look at regenerative farming, it's new, it's exciting, it's time consuming, it takes management. Everything we do in regenerative agriculture takes management. And you do that by taking the work you'd have done with tillage and maybe the extra herbicide passes, the extra fungicide passes, and use them for the knowledge to make your regenerative practice work. And that means you have to be in the field observing what you see. You cannot plant the crop and go to Florida and come back and try to harvest it, because it ain't going to be there as a regenerative farmer. You need to be out there and see how those roots are developed, and look and see if there's insect pressure, look and see, and whether that plant that you planted 6 months ahead actually put nodules on it and had nitrogen in the soil. Those are the things you have to be shovel ready. You have to be out there looking at what's going on.
I agree. It's your shadow.
If you look at me, I don't have a very big, my shovel has to have a motor on it in some respects. My wife says, so.
I like to say the best thing you can add to a field is your shadow.
Yes, correct.
And it's important to observe what's going on. So in your mind, Dave, what do you think it's going to take for regenerative agriculture to become the conventional agriculture? And how long will it take to get there?
It's going to take a while to get there. I don't think that it'll ever be 100%. It may never be 50%, because there's just, it is really easy in my mind to do conventional farming, because you take all the iron you can find, you disturb the soil as hard as you can disturb it. You put all the things that disturb the soil, which is chemicals and fertilizer, and you plant the seed. And to me, it might as well be in a plastic bucket with a water hose, because we've turned our soils into a hydroponic greenhouse. As a regenerative farmer, you're reliant on the moisture you get, understanding how to control that moisture, and that's through infiltration. You're learning to understand how the weather will affect it. So you use plants that maybe mature just a little bit sooner or something like that, so you can get another plant in, or even maybe having 2 or 3 plants growing that you could harvest at one time and separate. I think that may be the real key. But I'm really thinking it's the knowledge of not enough people yet doing it. I mean, I am so thrilled that I would say in 10 years, I started in 71, and there was never been a movement as fast as this regenerative movement has in 10 years. And now the people that's doing it is showing that what we had talked about in the 70s and 80s work, and they've taken it further than I ever expected things could go, and about all the ones that are really out pushing regenerative agriculture, I feel like they're my grandkids because they've all been here on the farm, majority of them. I mean, we've all learned together, and they're all willing to share with you their mistakes and their the good things. I mean, a good thing is with regenerative agriculture, you can lower your input costs and still maintain the yield,
Yeah.
and have a higher quality product at the end.
So really, in your mind, the limiting factor is this management bandwidth, essentially the capability to manage in a regenerative way and the time to manage in a regenerative way. Those are probably the two biggest limitations to regenerative agriculture being 51% of how farms produce food.
Right. Well, and I think the ones that's just started or ones that hadn't started it's what between your ears. That's our limiting factor.
Yep, that's 6-inch distance between the ears or 4 inches. What it all depends on how big.
Yeah.
I guess.
Right. Yeah. Right. But I really think as we see commodity prices hedging up, and they're going to hedge up just because of the kind of conditions we're in. But as commodity prices go up, then input costs go up. Pretty soon the fuel's going to jump up, and we're going to be at the same, I guess, $2 corn and $60 fertilizer is the same as $6 corn today and $1,000 nitrogen. I mean, the ratio is damn near the same. You're going to have about the same amount of money left.
Yeah, and
but if we could do it regeneratively and reduce your inputs by 25 or 30%, not spend the money for tillage and just imagine how much carbon could be saved by not making those 2 passes or 3 that conventional farmers make before they plant the seed.
So there's a lot of agribusiness that revolves around selling more and more stuff to get more and more yield. Okay, so more product inputs, shinier paint that goes bigger, better, faster. How do they adapt to regenerative ag versus push the same old? How does that happen? How do they reinvent their businesses essentially?
Well, I think
they're supportive of it instead of antagonistic to regenerative ag.
I think we're starting to see industry, if I can make that as a big, large consumption. I mean, you could talk about Deere, you could talk about AGCO, you could talk about CMH, New Holland case. And those are the 3 big ones. But, as you look at what they're talking about, Deere's talked to me about how they can work with their customers to talk about regenerative ag. They're willing to sit down and talk about it. The autonomous tractor from Deere may be a way that we could put that tractor out there following the combine, plant, and cover crop. It don't have to move a grain buggy. I see lots of possibilities with industry helping us move forward on regenerative ag, and they're still being able to stay in business to sell equipment.
That's a great point. It's just a matter of getting them to focus on this direction. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yes, correct. And I think the majority, the big 3 are, because it's not like they're trying to tell you can't do it. I mean, I was just impressed that Deere called and even asked me how they could start working with some of their farmers in Iowa and Illinois to talk about regenerative farming. You look at General Mills, they've spent a lot of money to figure out how to get their oats and wheat producers to be more regenerative. and Anheuser-Busch is talking, Nestle's is talking. It's going to be a good foundation. I don't think, I guess I'm really worried about when they talk about yield, feeding the world. I'd rather say we feed the world on protein than yield, because as we build yield, you take 300 bushel corn, there's only got about 4 to 5% protein.
Mhm.
So if we go to 600 bushel corn, is it only going to be 2% protein? How do we feed? Do we give them a lot of bulk and no protein, or do we slow down and give them a kernel of corn that has 8 or 9% protein?
Mhm.
In
Great.
1965, when I was in Ag, and 64 and 65, Morris Feed and Feeding said corn should be 8.6 protein and beans should be 44 to 48.
Well, the industry is paid for pounds, and that's what we're giving them.
Right. But I think it's going to the consumer. I think the public consumer will soon start dictating what they want, and then agriculture will change.
And I think that has happened, and they have a voice now and ways they connect that they haven't been able to before. So it's pretty.
Well, I think the COVID-19 kind of brought it on. They got figured, they couldn't find food in the shelves, now and they found out that, some of it don't have as much nutrient as it should have in it. And there's an awful lot of urbanites. I don't know whether you call them city people or urbanites that want to know where their food comes from.
Mm-hmm. That is very true. So what's the future hold for you, your son, grandkids, and the whole greater Brandt family?
Well, we're also in the cover crop seed business. I'm really looking forward to lots of better things to come along with cover crops. We're working with some breeders that's got some excellent ideas on how to get crops to grow in the cooler climates and wetter soils. We're looking at legume plants that can produce maybe 6 to 12% more nodulations, which will let us collect more carbon out of the atmosphere. The real trend is going to be learned how to harness this carbon horse that's out there, if we can ever corral it and get it understood. you know, uh, uh, you know, as far as the Brandt family, we're going to move more to food to table, farm to table stuff, just because we are having a hard time hanging on to land. When you only own 161 acres and you rent the rest of it, you lose a piece by death from a landlord, or urban development takes some of it. We're going to have to learn to adjust to that. And, instead of 5 cars a day now going past our house, we got almost 4,000. So maybe we could capture 10% of that. That'd be 400 a day. That might make a nice retail business.
It'd be an awful nice retail business. So,
and we are also pursuing with 7 or 12 other farmers, maybe building a processing facility for livestock.
Yeah, very much needed. And especially if you can be close to city like that, and you can offer fresh meats, year round, and special cut, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there.
Right. And my second grandson is just bought 2 emus, and he's counting his eggs before they, they're just 5-day-old chicks. So I keep telling him, you're counting a lot of eggs before they're going to lay them. So it's fun to work with grandkids. It really is. I can't tell you how much fun it is.
It is a joy to see them starting their own little enterprises. So
yes, it is
fun to see that rubbing off. So I'm sure your grandpa felt the same.
Yes.
Well, I sure thank you for your time today, Dave. Anything else you'd like to add or mention while we're together?
I just would like to have the producers think about using cover crops and start down the regenerative movement. Anything you do, to me, you don't have to be in it all the way. anything you do to move the needle from where you're at to less soil loss, better infiltration, reduction in inputs such as fuel. And we didn't talk about how much we can reduce the fuel, but by going to regenerative agriculture, but there's about a third of the fuel savings by doing it. Reducing some nutrients, being aware of your surroundings and learning where to go to and listen to webinars or go to field days if you need to, or just look up on the web and see who can talk to that's close to you, get close to him so he can actually mentor you through your problems as you start. And I'm always willing to answer my phone. I'm not a big texter, so I'll give you a phone call, because when my finger hits that key, it's got 3 or 4 letters in one. So, but I like the telephone yet, you know.
Yep, that's good. So do I. Well, we'll certainly in having the show notes how to get in touch with or check out more about your farm and the website and those kind of things. And I'm sure that if you want to reach out to Dave, he'd be happy to visit with you, because he can be just another one of the adopted grandkids that he can help get started in the right direction. So I really appreciate it today, Dave. And I sure thank you for all of your willingness to be a true pioneer in all things soil. And it's just fun to see that, grandkids with emus and grinding. He was talking about grinding flour for the second time to try to figure out the right size for a customer before we started recording, and just all these things he's still actively involved with and just keeps pushing the envelope.
Well, it's great.
My hat's off to you. You've done amazing things for agriculture.
I want to thank you for talking to me. A little side note here, a little advertisement for us. Our field day will be April 8th here on the farm. Everyone's invited to come. Our keynote speaker is going to be Ray Archuleta, and we're talking about how to start a regenerative farm program. In the afternoon, we'll look at different soils through monoliths. 15 years ago, we took the soils to see what they look like. We'll take them 2 days before the field day to compare them to the same location. And hopefully my soil scientists can find a change, and then we're going to show you some really good cover crops. And we have 15 different types of triticale planted. Some are new and some are old, and comparing the two to look at them. So it should be an interesting day, and hopefully it's not snow covered, but we'll take it however it comes,
Well, that's excellent, Dave. We'll certainly mention that in the notes here on April 8th, your field day. Sounds like a fun time. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of people there that interacting and sharing information with each other. So thank you for making your farm available to everybody.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for your time today. Take care, Dave.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I sure hope you were encouraged as you listen to David's journey as he and his family continue to grow and explore each day what their farm will look like tomorrow, all while making soil health a top priority in their operation. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers implement soil health practices, check out our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.